Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Level Up Podcast, where we talk to some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. I'm your host, Ken Rose, and today I'm here with Giuliano Bossi, a principal engineer in the application platform team at Shopify. Shopify is an e-commerce platform powering the online and brick-and-mortar stores of millions of merchants. Giuliano started his career as an engineer, switched into management and was previously a director of engineering at Shopify, but last year switched back to the IC path and is now a principal engineer. And today we're going to be chatting with Giuliano about that journey and career transitions in tech. Giuliano, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here.
So to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you start as a developer early in your career, and when did you switch into management? And then what prompted you to become an IC again?
Yeah, I think that as many Gen Xers, I started coding, even before high school, and it was, love at first sight. And I worked through the motion of building little things for myself, then starting to build little things for friends and family, then starting to build things for and getting paid actually. And I did that for a while, and then it wasn't really my choice, but naturally I was encouraged to move to the management side, and especially if you do that in a small company, you really never lose one side or the other. There's a bit of both. There's a mix going on there all the time, but then you grow into your career and you kind of move more deeper and deeper into the management craft, which is a craft in itself, and so you have to learn a bunch of things that maybe at least I wasn't understanding, or it was a surprise for me on a number of topics and elements. So you go deep in that craft. You start managing organizations that are bigger and bigger and bigger. You try to stay connected with the technical side as much as possible, and then at some point, it depends. At some point, typically people have to make a choice. Either they want to double down on the management side, and that's probably the path of least resistance in many ways. Or you try to do some funny move. You become maybe a founder, for example, which means that now you don't have two sides, but you have 1,000. You have to juggle at the same time, right?
I didn't realize that when we started the company. It's all the benefits or all the luxuries, I guess, of being a manager, plus also having to run a business at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. But in my case, instead, I actually was pulled back to the technical side, and I mean it was an interesting transition for me because at that point I was really thinking hard about my career, what I wanted to do next, and so fundamentally, ultra simplifying it, but fundamentally, I was thinking, okay, do I want to do this, double down on this, and do it with a bigger team, bigger organization, and so on, or do I want to flip the the table completely and rebalance the forces, so to speak? And in the end, I found that my energies were primed, were optimized more if I transitioned back to the technical side, which brought all sorts of other issues because you are very rusty at that point. Huge imposter syndrome that that will never go away in many ways. So it's interesting. It's an interesting experience for sure.
Definitely. Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned when you started as an engineer and first switched into management, you recognize that that's a craft and has its own sort of set of skills. Can you talk about maybe it's just some of those skills that, you honed over those years? Like what were the things that you think you took away from being as a manager or that you learned from being as a manager?
Yeah. So I mean, the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth at the time, so maybe today is different.
No, no, you're not. You're not that old today. Come on.
But I was literally thrown into management with no specific preparation of any sort, and many of the things that you can read around these days, like Camille Fournier book, for example, weren't nowhere near the horizon. And I think it's quite easy when you're in that situation to fall into the trap of just trying to optimize people's time and execution only, and failing to see the side of how a team collaborates and what defines a team. And it's not just a bunch of people in a room. I mean, nowadays we're not even in rooms anymore. But but at the time, it was quite easy to be in that situation. And so it took me a while to learn what it means to actually create a culture, create a bunch of values around the around which the team can operate. And at the time, XP, extreme programming, was taking off. So I really lean on that framework. And I was managing teams for a little bit with some interesting experiences, but it was only when I started looking into extreme programming that I finally found a framework that was useful for me in terms of how to work with people, how to collaborate, and so on. So that transition has been fundamental for me. And in the end, so fast forward, if you think about an organization like Shopify, where, for example, a director typically manages a team of 60, 80, 100 people, 100 plus people, and you are managing teams of teams, there are fundamentally three sides that we have identified as important to look into. It's a framework. It's called AAA, AAA, and the three A's stand for aim, assemble, and achieve. On the aiming side, it's more in terms of identifying the right problems to solve and collaborate in a multidisciplinary way in order to define the strategy to move forward. On the assembling side, fundamentally, it talks about getting the teams together, the people together. Quite often, it's not just an individual team, but you have to bring in some specialization and so on. And on the achievement side is pure execution. But in the end, while aiming and assembling are very important, the achieving side, the execution side, becomes predominant. And my view is that when you're a director in an organization like Shopify at this level, you're fundamentally an execution machine. And it might seem a little bit ruthless, but that's the job. That's what you really, what you have to love, what you have to find yourself fulfilled with. And yeah, it can be very interesting, it can be very rewarding. But at some point, yeah, in my case, I decided that I needed something else.
That's awesome. The AAA framework, is that a Shopify thing, or is that a framework from before that you've kind of been able to apply to Shopify?
No, it's as far as I know, it's a Shopify thing. Yeah.
Okay. When you said A's, I was thinking, okay, alignment and maybe autonomy, but no, it was a different set of A's.
Yeah.
That's a really useful framework. You talked about, as a director, that the focus then is much more on the execution side. Like, can you describe, maybe, are there different groups or different levels of management that would be responsible for like aim and assemble, or is that also still in the wheelhouse? Like aim, for example, I would think is more like a product manager thing, like identifying the right problems to solve. Or at what point does engineering management kind of enter into that picture?
Yeah, I think you're touching on something that is interesting, because for many companies that might be true. I worked in companies where product is king, and engineering basically follows product orders. And in many ways, there's comfort in that. There's a clear separation of roles, which brings simplicity and peace of mind in many ways. But that's definitely not the model that we follow at Shopify. If you're in engineering or UX or data and so on, you are. It's expected of you that you participate to the decisions that shape the product as well. And so there is a role in there for sure. Typically, product has perhaps the better perspective on things, but it's important to challenge the perspective and to finally arrive to something that it's optimized for the customers, or whatever initiative the team is pushing forward. Basically, the idea is that we believe that Let me take a step back. We don't want to get ourselves into local maxima. We're aiming at global maxima. And so we recognize that this is a cross-disciplinary effort and we need different perspectives to the table. And I would say that is especially true when you're working on an application platform. In the end, the users of the application platform are developers. And as an engineer, I think that I can bring that side to the table even more so, right?
Right. It sounds like a really like just radical concept, but you're kind of forcing everybody to act like a PM. Like whether you're an engineer or data, you have to have empathy for your customer. You have to understand what their needs are and help. If you see problems, like help bring them up, help get them prioritized because they're likely important and something that's going to help your customers,
Absolutely.
developers in this case. That's really
Yeah.
cool. So you were doing the management thing. You leaned on XP, had a great framework, managed teams, grew as a director. You were triple Aing. You had your teams executing, and then what caused the switch? Why coming back to, I don't know which side is the dark side or the light side, but why the switch? I was going to say coming back to the dark side, but maybe management's the dark side. Why come back?
Yeah. I think that, so first of all, this is very personal, and I expect to play differently for different people. But in my case, I always consider myself to be a hybrid. I love working with people. I love working with teams, growing people, and so on, getting them organized, etc. But I love working with the tech, directly with the tech, and going deep on how to use it, how to shape it, being pragmatic about it, making examining trade-offs, and so on. So these two things require time, okay? And time is not infinite, so you have to manage it somehow. And I felt that as Shopify grew, as my role grew, the balance was going definitely in one direction, and it was a lot more difficult for me to retain that hybrid nature, to the point where, I decided whether I wanted to give it up completely and just completely focus on one side, or flip it the other way. And the way that I made those decisions was to basically follow my energy. Where did I see my energy being more amplified? Where did I see where I felt more engaged and able to push more? But there's also another dimension, which is the fact that, and maybe that is a little bit situational, but one of the things that convinced me at that point was that I thought that there were certain problems that needed to be solved, and I felt that I was in the best position to go after those problems, and in order to do so, I had to switch to the technical side, essentially.
I'm guessing they were
It's a
like deeply
combination of things.
technical, and I'm guessing they were deeply technical problems, and it's not something that you just want to assemble a team around. It's something that like you specifically, felt like I need to dive in and do this.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. What have been some of the differences, I guess, now that you're being a principal engineer from being a manager? The reason I ask is generally like there's a lot of thoughts in the industry as people move up from being a senior engineer to being a staff engineer and a principal, that there is some amount of not direct management, but influence through a very technical lens. What have you found as some of the differences between what you were doing as a director and now what you're doing as a principal engineer?
Yeah, the main difference is that you're not directly involved into managing the individuals. So you don't do performance reviews. You're not involved into trying to push for a promotion of someone and so on. But those things don't go away completely. So the idea that you're completely removed from those things is, I think, a little bit delusional, because your work in that area starts to be a lot indirect. And that element of directness and indirectness exists on the other side as well, on the management side as well. It's like the balance is flipped over. So on the management side, you're you have an element of directness toward the people and the teams and so on, and indirect on the technology, depending on your company, but definitely at Shopify, that's the case. On the technical side, on the IC track, it's reversed. One of the main things that we want to see in staff plus engineers is how much they amplify the performance of everyone around them. And you cannot do that by just writing code. Sure, a big element can be that, but a much bigger element is how you can mentor the individuals, coach them, and help them navigate through the organization or through difficult technical decisions and so on. And so that element of helping the individuals and the team to grow and to improve their performance, if you want, is still there. But going back perhaps a little more direct way to your question, the fact is that you have a lot more time in order to go deeper into the technical problems and working with the people in the trenches compared to before, when you are, especially if you're leading teams and maybe there are 2, 3, 4 levels, you cannot be in the trenches that much, and so you probably operate through your direct reports, and everything beyond that direct level is kind of you rely on them, essentially.
I remember I had a similar career arc. Like I started as a principal engineer, or I started as a rank and file developer, and then became a principal engineer. And I remember a quote I heard was like, "Managers get leverage through people, and principal engineers and staff plus get leverage through technology." Right? Where, and I think hitting on what you're saying, that like when you're 3, 4 levels deep, it's not high leverage as a director to get into that technology. But when you're a principal engineer, it absolutely is. But you still need to have influence on the people around you.
Yeah, and I also don't want to give the impression that you just work with your direct reports and peers. It goes beyond that. But in terms of actually having really the pulse of the situation, it's very, very difficult to go beyond that close level of relationship that are basically reports, peers, and your lead and the immediate level of senior leadership above you.
So you talked about the AAA framework for directors. Is there kind of a similar framework that you can think about, that principal engineers should sort of adhere to? You mentioned amplify. That's also an A word. But are there like sort of sets of, concerns that principal engineers should think about beyond just the technology?
Yeah, there are some elements. One element is certainly scope and influence. But perhaps a better way to characterize it is if we think about the different archetypes of principal engineers. So there is this site that is quite popular, staffeng.com, and it describes the 4 archetypes: the tech lead, the architect, the solver, and the right hand. So I won't get into much of the details here, and are kind of implicit what they mean. But for example, you can think of the tech lead at the principal level might be someone who we can describe as a master coder, for example, and I mean that with the biggest respect possible. Some people think that coding, developing, programming, these are diminishing terms. They're not in my mind at all. So I think about the master coder like an artisan from a Renaissance.
Right, I was going to say like a Renaissance painter.
Detail, right? That level of care and passion and deep, intimate knowledge of the craft. So someone like that goes very deep into a specific domain or technology. Usually, it's easier when it comes to the technology rather than the domain itself. While someone like an architect goes more broad and looks after an area, but has a deep understanding of how this area interconnects with the different parts of the company, and how in turn the different services and components inside that area, how they interact and how they will move on together with the product roadmap. So I think that these are some of the elements that are useful. And again, this is a multi-dimensional space. So it's not that someone necessarily has to be 100% in one bucket.
Yeah.
So this is in the end a 4-dimensional space. And for example, if I think about myself, I think I'm mostly a solver and an architect, with some elements also of the right hand. I've been used as a right hand in the past, but I know people who are 100% just right hands. And so they work very close with senior management, perhaps in the C-suite and so on. And they have this really broad view over the entire company, and they jump into individual areas, work with the teams into those areas in order to give direction. So very, very strategically, and then they step back and look into other areas. I don't do that often, but I've been, maybe at a lower scale, I've been in that space as well. But long story short, I recommend to look into those 4 archetypes and then try to play with it in your day to day, and where you see yourself more activated, and it can change over time, by all means. Oh, and perhaps one thing that I would like to emphasize here is that the solver is described as a role where you're typically parachuted into an area because there is a problem that needs to be solved, and it has been identified by leadership and so on. That is true. That has happened to me 100%. But there's a twist. I think it's interesting when you are actually identifying the problems yourself, rather than someone else identifies the problem and then pulls you in to solve it. Mr. Wolf, like in Pulp Fiction. Okay, so that is definitely one side of it. But the other side is when you are also the one that is bringing the problems to the surface, and perhaps you're the only one who can do that, and then you have to quote battle, or try to influence management, the senior management, to recognize that this is an issue and needs to be solved. And that's a completely different ball game, because at that point your organizational skills and your organizational influence and so on become very, very important.
It sounds like, can you maybe talk about any skills that you have or that you gained as a manager that might be able to help in situations like that? Because I fully agree with you. Like, you're kind of told as a solver, like, hey, here's a problem, like, go fix it. And then, bust out all the technical craft and knowledge and go fix it. And you're right that making a strong case, making a business case for doing engineering work is a skill in and of itself. Can you talk about any tools, tips, techniques, things that you learned as a manager that can help principal engineers in doing that?
Yeah, one thing that I think that individuals, especially on the IC track, or managers early in their career, they think they have basically one shot. So I have to do my pitch, like elevator pitch. I have to pitch my idea, and then if it gets shut down, that's it. Okay. And I'm sure there are companies that operate like that. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But in a more collaborative environment, there is a back and forth. And so you build a case, you touch on certain dimensions. Why this is a problem worth solving? What are the consequences if we solve this problem, or what are the negative consequences if we don't solve it? Why is it worth solving it now? How can we measure success? What are the risks, and how can we mitigate some of these risks? And how does this change the organization? What is the impact on the organization, and so on? So these things, typically, it's like peeling an onion. It takes a while, and this is very jargony, but it takes a while to get to the core of the issue. And so you have to think of this as a dance. It's a dance. Okay, there are different moves, and I absolutely, I don't mean this in a manipulative way. Okay, I'm very far removed from the idea of manipulation here.
Like in the politicking and
Exactly. And I don't want to work in an environment where you have to spend a significant amount of energy just to massage the relationships and that kind of stuff. But there is an element of communication, and we are all human beings coming to a problem with different perspectives, and the Vulcanian mild male doesn't exist, and so we have to communicate somehow. Okay, we have to find a way to understand each other, and of course, that doesn't mean that we will always be on the same page. But again, this is a dance, and it requires a while to go through through these problems. And so there is a specific problem that I have in mind. I won't say what it is, but it took me 3+ years to actually get to it and be in the right position where I can make my case properly, and the issue is recognized, and we're gonna work on it. Or I can think of examples of situations where the company said we will never do that, and then you have to look into it. Why we will never do that? What are the consequences of doing that, whatever that is? And what are the consequences if we don't do it? And then you start building your case and explain, if we don't do that, this is going to happen. So Are you sure that this is actually the right
Is it
thing?
never,
Yeah, exactly. And usually good companies are the ones that are willing to revisit an issue in the presence of new information. That is typically a sign of a healthy culture.
Yeah, it's for Shopify specifically. There have been, when I was there, things that would never happen, and then did happen. I remember when it was like we would never hire. Actually, I wasn't there for this part, but we would never hire outside Ottawa. And it's like, actually, no, we're going to hire outside Ottawa. And it's like, okay, we're never going to hire. We would never do fully remote, and then COVID hit. Oh, we're fully remote. No, that's just from the outside, right? I can only imagine internally. I totally agree that level of sort of intellectual honesty to really go back and question the hard line statements like, oh, we'll never do this, to understand and peel back that, like, why did we say that? What were the reasons behind it? And like, are those reasons still valid in whatever new context exists today?
Yep, for sure.
I want to touch on, a framework that you talked about. You're, describing the business case, right? Or it's like you're characterizing like, why is this a problem? What are the consequences? What are the negative consequences? What are the risks? It almost sounds like, again, product management, right? It's writing the business case and explaining product management for like an engineering concern, but explaining like, here is the current state, here's the ideal future state, here's the pain we have in the current state, here's what we want to get to. Is that a fair assessment, or?
Yeah, it is. So, especially when you're dealing with infrastructure and when you're dealing with evolving the underlying infrastructure that doesn't contribute directly to the bottom line or directly to the core business and so on, but it keeps the light on and it prevents things to degrade dramatically. There's no better advocate for that than someone on the technical side. And you actually have to frame it in terms that the rest of the business can understand. And so it's good to invest whatever, I don't know, the time of 10 engineers for 1 year into this initiative, because this will lead us to a reduction in latency of 50 milliseconds. And in certain contexts, that is really, really important. In others might not be, but in certain contexts, that is really, really important. And you have to be able to manage those ideas and to build your case so that it can connect with people that are not necessarily intimately involved with the problem that you're solving. So the situation that you don't want to be in is the one where you feel that it's obvious that you have to solve this problem. It's clear, it's immediately obvious, and you talk with the decision maker and they don't have any idea what you're talking about. They don't connect with it at all. And guess what? You are the one that has to bridge that gap.
Yep.
And it might seem like getting your hands a little bit dirty with management topics, but it depends on how high are the stakes. So how important it is to solve the problem and how motivated you are to solve it. And definitely you're going to need support also from the organization around you. But often you are, as a principal engineer, you're the one that is in the best position to make that case. And some you will win, some you will lose. Some you will revisit in some time, as we just said.
Yeah.
And so on.
I think that's actually an important thing, because sometimes you might see it as a problem. And I'm not saying you specific on this problem, but like, and perhaps the context isn't the right time, right? Maybe it's not the right time to invest, or there are other higher priority things. We know this is important, but it's not right now. Or maybe management, to your point, doesn't think it's a problem and it's your job to advocate for it. And hey, continuing to beat that drum for years, then if that's what it takes, but then it does surface and it gets done. But I love that observation you made earlier, that like it's not a one and done. It's not like that Eminem song, like you only get one shot. It's you have repeated attempts. You also have, I don't know, another observation I'll make. This is I remember this happened in a, not Shopify, but a previous company I worked at. Management also changes. Sometimes the decision maker you're dealing with isn't a decision maker anymore, and then there are new goals, there become new priorities, and then that thing that you thought is important, you can get a resounding year from, or you can get somebody who's more willing to listen.
Yeah, but also the conditions around the company change over time. I mean, think about what happened in the last 3 years, right? It was a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Things change dramatically, and they're going to change again. They are changing again. So we have to be able to adapt to those changing conditions. Some will be to our advantage. And again, I don't mean it in a personal gain point of view, but to the things that we care deeply about and we think that should be pursued. Some will be in the opposite, will go in the opposite direction. So we need to be able to adapt to that.
Yeah. I had one final question for you, Giuliano, about the transition from management to IC, because you talked about when you were principal engineer, there was like a lot of rust and some imposter syndrome. Can you talk about, for our listeners, what were some of the elements of that imposter syndrome? Was there anything specifically that happened, any kind of like failure you went through, or anything that just made you feel like, oh man, what's going on? Or can you help characterize that? Because I'm certain that for other folks that are considering changing, that's going to be something they're going to go through also.
Yeah. I mean, writing software requires a certain amount of dedication, and it's a lot of it is also a matter of muscle memory. If you don't do it, that muscle memory goes away, and so you feel incredibly clumsy, and you're making rookie mistakes that you wouldn't make 10 years ago when you were close to it. But then also things change around you. So the technologies that we're using today are very different from the ones that we were using 10 years ago. And if you don't have the time to keep up with it, you will have to make up the time and recover some of it. There are two things that help me really, really dramatically. And one is something that I would recommend everyone to focus on since early on in their career, which is focus on the first principles, because those are the things that don't change over time. So the technologies may change, the surrounding conditions may change, and so on, but a certain way to think about problems, to think about systems, to think about how to approach a solution, and so on. I mean, a trivial idea is thinking about dependencies and coupling, for example. If you master these concepts, which have been described in literature since the
60s,
late 60s, or something like that, for sure in the 70s. If you really master those ideas, they're going to stay with you for forever, and you're going to be able to apply them in different contexts, regardless of the technology. So I strongly recommend to focus on those first principles. And the other thing is that when I decided to make my transition, I built a nice little doc that described what I wanted to do and so on. And in it, I wrote down that I wanted to join a team, actually 2 different teams, and do a couple of 3 months rotations with them when I was acting just as an IC, just as an engineer in the team who is onboarding with them and getting through the motion and so on. And that is, I think, really important that you are given the space and the time to do that, because otherwise you're just dropped into the battle and you're not equipped with it. You're not. Right. It's like, I don't know. I'm running out of metaphors, but essentially you're not.
You're trying to catch up and fight, or like, I don't know, hold the sword while you're in the battle.
Exactly. Yeah. You're a professional athlete who's just been on vacation for a month, and you're required to play the finals. You're not ready, right? You need time to get there. Okay. And I'm no professional athlete, but anyway, so having the opportunity to even to fail in a way, in a safe condition, I think it's really important, because I wasn't sure that this would have worked out, right? I went through this, and maybe at the end of it, I would have seen that it wasn't for me. And so I would have had to roll back and find something else. But it went well. But anyway, that really helped to recalibrate my brain. That doesn't remove imposter syndrome, okay? But at least it puts you in a situation where you can still you can operate with success, essentially.
Yeah, it gives you opportunities also, it sounds like, to get success, to get those wins. Like you're working on a team, you're not on the hook for a very large technical outcome, right? It's like you're doing the good, solid, regular engineering, fixing tickets, working on things, building systems, working with people, and kind of, it's like getting back to the gym after not working out for a while, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like, I just gotta get back into shape, get the habits back, get the muscle memory back, and then build that base, and then you can go off and do the right things.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
great. Well, Giuliano, this has been amazing. Thank you, like, so much. Before we wrap up, I always like to ask, our guests, like, what's your favorite music to listen to when you do work, or if you want to have focus time?
Huh. Okay, that's interesting. Um, it depends. I have a kind of a certain relationship with music, so that certain type of music, I really get drawn into it, and I can't do anything else when I listen to it. I can't even read. So I can drive, but I can't do anything intellectually challenging, and so that doesn't work for me. But I found that some type of um, some type of jazz work well depending on the circumstances, especially if I have to self-regulate and calm myself down a little bit, or I go back to some things that I know intimately and deeply, and so I can actually disengage the brain a little bit and go with an auditory automatic pilot in a way.
Hmm.
So music from my youth, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But if I can't do it if it's intellectually very challenging, because it doesn't work for me. Or I,
Right.
I don't understand people who can work and listen to podcasts at the same time. I don't know how they do that. I can't
Right.
I can't do that. It's the same part of the brain that process the information and make me work, so I cannot do that.
Cool. And what's the best way, Giuliano, for people to follow you on social media if they want to kind of keep up with your
Huh.
ideas or thoughts there?
I am not very active,
Okay.
not at all. So right now there isn't a way, but yeah, I mean, I have a Twitter account. It's called Thinking Box. You can ping me there, and we can chat one on one. I'm always up for a chat one on one, but
Okay.
I've kind of retreated uh, from social media.
Okay. Well, at Thinking Box on Twitter, and we will include information in the show description. So, Giuliano, it has been just absolutely great having you, reconnecting with you, and really appreciate taking the time, to join us. We got the opportunity to chat today about the transition from management and skills as a manager to being a principal engineer, and important skills for being a principal engineer, and how some of the crossover of being a manager can make you a better principal engineer. Um, I'd like to thank all of our listeners again for listening and staying with us till the end of the show. And if you have any other topics or guests that you'd like to see on the show, send us an email at levelupatopslevel.com. Giuliano, thank you again.
This was really fun. So yeah, thank you.
All right, all the best. See everybody next time, and happy building. Bye bye.